is making me. What's time at a thing they kill or keep us by or lose or living? I gotta go faster, keep up the pace, just to stay in the human race. I could go supersonic, the problem's chronic. Tell me, does life exist beyond it? When I need to sate, I just accelerate into oblivion. Into oblivion.
Buenos nachos, amigos. Welcome back to another episode of Record Breakers. I am Petey Rave. Here with me, as always, is my quorum of yahoos. We got none other than Brett.
Hey, Birdum.
We got Drew.
Hi, Birdum.
And we got Patrick.
Sup?
We're here once again to talk about music. We're going to talk about something very interesting. An album that was released 10 years ago soon. Don't know the exact date, but was packaged together 10 years ago, I guess you would say. Very interesting album, very interesting circumstances around it. So 2004 rolled around. Jay-Z, otherwise known as Hova or the Jigga Man, decided he was retiring from the rap game, as it were, the rap game. And he released a kind of what many critics called the seminal album called the Black Album. Along with that album, he also released the a cappella version of said album. And from that was born many mashups, many after this album, but many mashup albums where people more than often than not would pair it with another color themed album. The most notable among them, I think, undeniably most notable among them is this album. Guy by the name of Danger Mouse, Brian Burton, producer, kind of up and coming producer, was living in the UK, I believe, at the time. Wasn't really super notable until he created this album, but he decided to mash up in certain way, take the Black Album and craft underlying instrumentals for the vocals of the Black Album using the Beatles' self-titled EP, the original self-titled album that gets nicknamed after the monochromatic cover, the White Album, and creating the Gray Album. Fascinating album. Created a lot of controversy because, EMI was buying any of that shit. They didn't appreciate their samples were being used without the permission, but it was a notable album and kind of put Danger Mouse on the map as a producer, as a guy in the hip hop game. Created Danger Doom, which in turn created Gnarls Barkley, which in turn gave CeeLo Green the relevance that he has right now. It's a very fascinating album. Let's go around the horn. I'll ask you guys. Let's first ask Drew. Drew, what expectations did you have coming into this album?
Well, I had heard a lot about this album. At the time that it came out, I wasn't really that much into hip-hop, and I really wasn't into the whole mashup thing at all. So I didn't really look into it at that point. It was always something I meant to go back to, because since then I have gotten into both of those things. So I always meant to go back to it, but it always slipped my mind. I knew it was very, very well regarded to the point where, even though it was sort of a limited release because of file sharing in the internet, it never really died. And that it got enough of a buzz to where, EMI freaked out, and it pretty much created Danger Mouse's career after that. So, going into it, I had pretty lofty expectations.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, what expectations did you have coming to this album?
There's sort of two sides to this. The first and foremost is I like mashups. And I even like the minute you hear they're going to put a rap album on top of a rock album, I go to Wugazi, which is exactly what it sounds like, Wu-Tang Clan on top of Fugazi, which seriously go check that little thing out. Side note, but I have this other problem that I don't like Jay-Z, like irrationally, and it's not like a commentary on his talent or abilities. It's just I don't like Jay-Z. So I like the Beatles. The White Album's not my favorite Beatles album, but it's a Beatles album. But I don't like Jay-Z. So I was curious if the Beatles could make me like Jay-Z, basically.
All right. Brett, I'm curious about you. What expectations did you have coming into this album of sorts?
Well, I'm not familiar with the Black Album. That was not a thing that that ran in my circles at that time. Mind you, what was this, 2004?
Mm-hmm.
No, I was not listening to this. But I'm pretty familiar with the Beatles. I was around a lot of that, so I knew at least half of what I was getting into. It never landed in my lap, and I never really searched it out, but I was aware of it and aware of, how noteworthy it was. But no, I was a blank, unadulterated little slate ready to, have things written all over me.
Yes. So very interesting thing about the themes and elements of this album. There are two, the Black Album and the White Album. But more importantly, it's not what you would expect from a typical mashup or the stereotypical mashup. So we are all friends with a guy by the name of Zach Holder, aka DJZ, who specializes in the mashup. Recently he put out one of his, I think much lauded in our circles, albums, Out the Door 2. And one of the things I said in regards to that, and it's one of the things that I think of in mashups in general, is that the novelty in the mashup comes from the contradiction, the how things contradict, whereas the art in the mashup comes in the cohesion. And I think this album kind of exhibits that cohesion in the sense that this is not just we're listening to the Beatles and the Jay-Z at the same time. Woo! Danger Mouse takes the White Album and deconstructs each song and crafts a beat in order to lay a foundation for Jay-Z to rhyme upon retroactively. And that is most presently evident, and I put in the notes, where all the album titles, what you usually see with a mashup album, all the titles are like a clever, smash together of the two titles, my first song of this and that, but when you see the song titles, they're just the Jay-Z songs. So what Danger Mouse did was he just created new beats for the Jay-Z songs. And that's, I think, the crux of how everything is. It's a deconstruction. It's an exercise in the kind of the art of sampling. And I think it's a fascinating look into that art form, in a sense. I guess I'll go with Patrick. What were the themes and elements that stood out for you?
So I'll start out with the idea. The notion of doing this sort of mashing of color albums together, especially sort of because they both kind of came at similar places in the respective artist's career. Jay's the White Album's a little bit later in the Beatles. It's when the drugs got good. The Black Album was Jay-Z's, final album because he was going to retire. But, he's Kiss, basically.
The Brett Favre of hip-hop. Let's just call it what it is.
Kiss of hip-hop.
Oh, let's not insult him that badly.
Again, I don't like Jay-Z. Rationally. Every time, my opinion of Jay-Z is every time I hear a Jay-Z song, I just realize that this guy really, really, really wishes he wrote Illmatic and not whatever his first album was, because Nas's Illmatic is a better take on this sound. the sort of that New York, very like laid back vocals hip hop, and I thought Nas did a better job of it at that time. And that's my stupid like music nerd. I have to have an opinion on everything take on Jay-Z, and it's not that I think he's untalented or not good at what he does. I just don't like him. So, if that makes sense, it's completely irrational. I can't pick apart what I don't like about Jay-Z. All I can say is I don't like Jay-Z, but I like the Beatles, and I like this idea from a concept, from an idea perspective, from being the guy who said, I'm going to take this Black Album, I'm going to put it with the White Album, I'm going to call it the Gray Album. That's genius. The execution left a lot to be desired for me. What I think I would have enjoyed and what I tried to look at it as was a Beatles remix record that happened to have rap music over it, or happened to have rapping over it. And some of the Beatles remixes were fun, but I didn't like any of the rapping at all. Any of it.
Interesting. Drew, what would be the themes and elements that like things stood out for you?
Well, I guess I came at this from the opposite end of Patrick, listening to his radio. I'm not a huge fan of the Beatles. I'll come out and say that. You can hate me all you want at Extra
You can hate me
Stretch.
now.
That's fine. Yeah, bring it on. I don't care. I've never been a huge fan. Jay-Z though, I really dig listening to Jay-Z. There's just something, I don't know, fun about his records. So, but I was intrigued by the idea. Like you said, Petey, the best mashups are the contradiction. They're the two things that you don't think should go together together.
The novelty isn't a contradiction.
Yeah. And like, I think it's kind of cool the way the producer will seeing that mashup and how the producer weaves them together is. Swagger mentioned Fugazi, and I loved Fugazi. That album was awesome. I really, really liked it. This album as well, I went into it not as much of a fan, but as I listened to it again and again, like I started to hear where Danger Mouse sort of picked the samples that he used and picked the beats that he used to emphasize the rapper. And to do that is very weird because rap usually the rapper gets the beat, the rapper raps over the beat, and then he makes the emphasis on the beat where he wants to. Whereas this is the producer making the emphasis on the words where he wants to, which I think was a really, really cool idea. And it really, really was a lot of fun. I ended up really, really liking it at the end of the day. Unfortunately, because of how underground and like weird this album was, I didn't get the best quality fidelity wise. If somebody could find a FLAC or a 320 MP3 of this, that would be fantastic. I don't know if that even exists at this point, but
the best we have is like the remastered version. I think that's about as good as we got.
Which also sounds like 128K MP3s that you downloaded on Napster in 2002.
Which was a fun throwback for me because I listened to my first Jay-Z album. But it was really, really Danger Mouse getting a career after this was really fair because he did a really, really good job of mixing the two together and letting the Beatles force Jay-Z up, which was cool.
Nice. And Brett, I'm curious, what stood out to you musically?
I don't have any irrational hatred towards either one of these two sources, but judging it on the fact that it's put together by a guy pulling from two things, if you're going to pull from the Beatles, you've got a lot of different stuff to pull from, a lot of different meters, a lot of different beats, a lot of styles, a lot of weird, everything from, this is where shit got weird for the Beatles. So you've got a lot, you got some of that going on. So, and the fact that the lyrics, there wasn't a whole lot of, it was the Beatles that were being cut up and mixed around and mushed and played with, which I really like that because, you know, it's more of a struggle to push up a somebody who is not legendary in the world of music for generations and generations than it would be if you're putting a hip hop beat behind the Beatles. You know,
Yeah.
I think it went out and it took equally from both halves in different ways, and it was really pieced together in a way that I was not expecting, having never heard this before.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a fascinating, like, and I mentioned that you know, the contradiction, and like I said, I'll say it again, but the art form also is in the cohesion. I said the novelty is in the contradiction, the art form is in the cohesion, and it's cohesive. The way he kind of lays the foundation of the music for the different raps. I think so we're getting into some key tracks. I think some of my key tracks here, I think partially because of the, you know, Jay-Z's raps, and partially because of how they work well with the new music, the new instrumentals. Song like Encore, which uses in fact two different Beatles songs, and actually has a distinct changeover from using one song during one part of the song and switching gears and using an entire other song, which is really fascinating, really cool. A really interesting song in December 4th, in the way that Danger Mouse uses the instrumentals to kind of underline the emotion of the song and the motivation of the song, and like that. And similarly, Moment of Clarity does that in a similar way, kind of using the beats and doing a very good job of layering them under to kind of emphasize the emotion of the song. And My First Song, which is the last song, My First Song, the last song, which is again just a really fantastic song on the original, on the Black Album, and really done well on this album as well. I think just how the beat and the song comes together. Let's go back around the horn. Drew, what would be kind of the key tracks for you?
To me, you let off with Encore, and that's a really, really good point. Encore is actually one of my more favorite of Jay-Z's songs, and the use of the two and the switchover and all that, like you said, was really a lot of fun. The 99 Problems, the use of Helter Skelter, I thought was really, really cool. The song as a whole was a lot of fun. 99 Problems, as opposed to Encore, is probably my least favorite Jay-Z song, but something about Helter Skelter made the song better for me. And then Dirt Off Your Shoulder probably had my favorite beat come out of Danger Mouse on this entire record. Really, really cool. Again, Dirt Off Your Shoulder, probably, if I was picking Jay-Z songs for a playlist, Dirt Off Your Shoulder would not make the cut, unless it was this version. So,
yeah,
there's that.
Yeah, it's definitely more the mainstream song of the albums. Those are those hit songs, those pop songs.
Right.
Patrick, what songs would you say did you key in on?
I don't know if that's the word I would use. I tried to look at the when I realized I couldn't get over my dislike of Jay-Z. I tried to just look at it sort of objectively from a sort of production standpoint, and I started just trying to listen to the Beatles remixes that were happening underneath. And Encore, I think, my literal note is, can Danger Mouse just remix a bunch of Beatles songs? Because I would want to listen to that. Because from his perspective, I mean, I keep talking about Jay-Z, but Danger Mouse knows what the hell he's doing. Like he has a distinct ability and uses samples well, and it is able to blend stuff together to make something different than what it started out as. And sort of like Drew said, 99 Problems, not a song I like, but musically it had a really good bass line going, which obviously, pulled from Helter Skelter and it being Paul McCartney. The man knows how to write a bass line or two. So those two kind of were the ones that I could find some joy in, I guess. because the stuff going on was fun and interesting, and Danger Mouse, like, I almost am really curious to hear what he does when he's not doing this sort of novelty thing and like, you know, taking it a little more seriously, because he has some skills.
Yeah.
Because I've heard like little bits of Gnarls Barkley and stuff, just because, you know, it's a small world and you hear that and that's fun.
Broken Bells would be a good example. I think of his group, his work on that Gorillaz album he produced would be an interesting example. And of course, Danger Doom, which we might visit in a future episode. Brett, what songs did you key in on? What songs caught your attention?
Everybody's talked about 99 Problems. But the use of the most famous Harrison track, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, over What More Can I Say, is probably the most memorable. Just the way that they piece together such a I don't know, open mic night schlock that you hear from people. Like, you know, it's a great song, but, you know, it's kind of hard to do something new with that song. And it really, really fit well. And the Helter Skelter being like a very, very heavy song, and a very not Beatles sounding for that era. Using that well was surprising. But there was a lot of other stuff on this album that sort of went in one ear and out the other. But there were some like very, very, very bright lights of wow, this guy really dug through all of these albums in this album. He went through and found this turnaround, this hook, and he did a good job.
Mm-hmm. It is definitely the case there. He put some work into the sampling and, you know, created kind of an art form in the sampling. I guess let's go back around the horn to kind of get your conclusive thoughts. Drew, what would be your thoughts overall on the album?
My thoughts are that it is an album that, for me, the first listen was not the one that got me. And it's weird for me to do that. Usually on a first listen of an album, I can kind of parse at least some sort of generalization of how I feel about the album. But the more I listen to it, like Brett said, you really start to hear the weird intricacies and like that depth that Danger Mouse brought to it. And like, I'm going to pull this out of the White Album just because I can. And I thought that was really, really cool. Overall, I think the album is 100% worth a listen. Maybe worth two, as I point out. And it was really a lot more fun than I thought going into it. If you were into mashups at all and you haven't heard this album, like, definitely go back and give it a shot.
Mm-hmm. Patrick, what would be your thoughts on the album overall?
If you want an album that blends hip hop and rock music, listen to Wugazi. If you like Jay-Z and the Beatles, maybe give this a try just to see what it is. I don't want to rag on the artist here because he chose to use a rapper I didn't like. From a production perspective, I respect what he did. It's interesting, it's fun. If you like mashup, it's probably, I think most people would like, kind of like Drew said, it's kind of required listening if you like mashup, because it was probably the first mashup thing I had ever heard of, but, you know, didn't hear it. But I knew it existed in the long, long ago because someone, you know, said it. Oh my God, someone took the Jay-Z's Black Album and the White Album and stuck them together. And, you know, that has some thing. It's just, for me, it's my inability to separate Jay-Z from it and my dislike of him. I would have rather had the White Album with James Hetfield grunting over it to be the Gray Album, just yelling "yeah" a lot. Also, someone make that. Where's Nesh Complex? I know he doesn't listen to the show because he's got better things to do. But I just want like just one song of a White Album, song, and James Hetfield yelling.
No, Nesh Complex has an album to release that he's kickstarting, which everyone should kickstart. Brett,
Kid's got talent.
What would your thoughts be on the album overall?
I mean, it's probably not going to end up back in my normal music rotation, but I do understand that this album was well made, and it probably deserves the praise that it gets. But I listened to it a lot, even when we were in Utah together, Petey. I was listening to it with my wife. My wife had information to give to me about her like or dislike on me listening to this over and over because it was the only music I had. But yeah, it took a little stewing. I had to listen to it a little while to pull out the little nuance that was pulled. But it's definitely worth a listen. It won't hurt you to at least give it one try.
Yeah, or a couple.
It hurt me very deeply.
I think overall in the album, I think here's the key thing is if I were picking a Jay-Z album, I wouldn't pick the Black Album. I'd probably pick something else like Reasonable Doubt or The Blueprint or something like that. If I think the most important thing is the concept and the art of the sampling and what it did to, again, Danger Mouse's career and the notability it created from a little project that he did for a bunch of his friends to release a few copies so people could have it, where it turned into this big thing and, it created Grey Tuesday, Kevin Rose flapping his gums about it on Tech TV, on the screensavers, rallying people to do, protest on Grey Tuesday or whatever. And that's the important thing right there. It's a very smart, very well accomplished production exercise. And it really exhibits kind of the art of the sample, the art of the rap sample in a really good way. And I think, going this, jumping over to Danger Doom, and then jumping forward to other stuff with Danger Mouse, you can see kind of that progression in style and kind of a growth, which is really cool. And I think that's basically the main thing, is just the art of the sampling is what really stands at the center of this record.
It's a good thing to point out because a lot of people might get hung up on, the rap sample or those type of productions are not as musical as this, that, or the other thing. And it's they still have to have a lot of musical knowledge to do it well.
Mm-hmm.
That is fair.
Yes. So we're going to get to our main event of the evening, as I always say. We're going to talk about our haiku reviews. I'm going to start with, let's rip the Band-Aid off and get Patrick. Patrick, what is your haiku review?
My haiku review. Why does this exist? The Beatles remixed alone might be much better.
Interesting. Brett, what is your haiku review?
Well, because I couldn't fit in Sgt. Pepper Straight Outta Compton, my haiku is a great foundation built on the backs of greats. Not a bad album.
Mm-hmm. Drew, what is your haiku?
Before I get into my haiku, now I want to hear that. But not true mashup, but works strongly as a showcase of the producer.
Mm-hmm. And of course, my haiku is not your typical mashup album, but instead sampling as art form. I think that kind of is the summation that it would put out there. Of course, you can listen. Well, you can't really listen to this on the playlist that we curate, but you can find it out there. It's easy to find. It's not necessarily something that you're going to have trouble finding. Just Google it. Like I said, it's not the best quality files, but they're out there. Kind of throwback to back in the days when you took 128K files off of Napster and whatnot, or Kazaa and whatnot. It gives you a little bit of a nostalgia feel. But they're out there. But,
Bear Share? Did you just bring up Bear Share?
Yes, I did.
Sherazade,
I was all about bear
Nutella.
back in the day.
Nutella, Sherazade, all that good stuff. But what will be on those playlists is our next album, and that's going to be brought to you by Swagger. Swagger, Patrick, what is the next album for us?
So I'm bringing the metal because I don't think we've had enough metal on this show, and I'm bringing specifically Swedish metal, specifically Swedish progressive death metal with Opeth and their album Ghost Reveries.
We shall look forward to that. And of course, those playlists, like I said, I probably should have mentioned where they are. They're on Beats Music, Spotify. If you want us to curate one on your preferred music service, we shall. Just let us know. You can let us know at recordbreakerspodcast@gmail.com or at 4recordbreakers. But that's it for us. So you can find us all over the internet. Patrick is at The Swagger. Brett is at Hibbity-Bibbard, HIBBITYBIBBARD. Drew is at X. I'm at PD Rave. The show is at 4recordbreakers, recordbreakerspodcast.com, recordbreakerspodcast@gmail.com, Stitcher, iTunes. Find all the things, subscribe, like, share. That's it. Until next time, hasta los huevos.
Bye.
Fuck Jay-Z.